name's Roger Sosa. I'm with the Back of the Yards Neighborhood Council. I'm the Director of Commercial Development there. I want to thank you for inviting me here. Welcome to Night with the Worms. I want to thank also Ed, Dale, Brendan, and Romana for having me here, and thank all of you for coming. This is a really happy night for me. When I first met Ed and Brendan and company, they were occupying a very small space in the plant, trying to figure out ways to make their business grow, how to turn a few worms into a lot more worms. And today, here we sit in this really nice facility, headed towards capacity, with plans to make more worms and get a bigger facility. And in a lot of ways, the growth of Nature's Little Recyclers kind of mirrors the growth of the whole urban agricultural movement here in Chicago. Before Mayor Emanuel took office, the city had a pretty distinctly anti-urban farming bias. In an interview with Ken Dunn of City Farms in Cabrini Green, he expressed what was the conventional wisdom at the time. Mayor Daley told us that people moved to the city to get away from farms, not to have farms in the city. I don't want to go any further than that with that comment, but Dunn said he got a lot of mileage out of being the Green mayor, but he didn't really have it in his bones. In 2011, we had a big change in administration. We had the Emanuel administration come in, and with that, an enormous sea change in how the city of Chicago viewed the businesses in the city of Chicago. Instead of viewing them as entities to be regulated and taxed, they started viewing them as entities to be fostered and encouraged. And specifically, Mayor Emanuel saw the potential benefits of urban farms. He also saw the fact that there are 14,000 empty city lots in the city of Chicago, and an enormous amount of entrepreneurial spirit waiting to be tapped. So, against this backdrop in 2011, he initiated a number of changes that have really helped create the urban farming environment here in Chicago. Number one, he increased the size that community gardens could be up to 25,000 square feet, which is a half an acre. Before, they were confined to less than 2,000 square feet. So that's an enormous increase. Number two, he allowed limited sales of fruit and vegetables in residentially zoned areas. So you can start to have farmers markets in more residentially zoned areas. That's a big difference. He also started to relax the rules on fencing and parking for commercial and large commercial urban farms. So now people can actually go to work there. You can fence the building off. And you can actually create an environment like they have at the plant where you have a very good large working urban garden outside. And finally, he allowed aquaponics, which is a method of cultivating fish and vegetables and things in water. How do you cultivate fish out of water? I'm not sure exactly how you do that. But for cultivating fish and vegetables in kind of a closed system. And that system before 2011 was confined only to indoor spaces. And in 2011, it was now allowed to go outside and use aquaponics outside. All those regulatory changes are huge because they allowed urban farming and urban gardens to expand beyond small niches into rather large spaces like you see at the plant and like you see here. So while it seems that urban agriculture is a pretty relatively new movement, if you look at cities like Chicago, what you see is that people have been farming in the city since the city began. It's been fairly traditional. You had your factory job, but on the weekend you had your plot of land in the back of your house where you grew your vegetables and you grew your tomatoes and things like that. But since the 1970s, urban farming has really been on a steady and slow upclimb. And it's really been a factor of the loss of manufacturing in a lot of cities. Manufacturers started moving plants, as we know here in Chicago, from union strongholds like Chicago and Detroit to places like Texas and Alabama that are not union places, and then continue to move them further south. Mexico, South America, move them across the ocean to Japan and China. The loss of all that manufacturing base essentially moved a lot of jobs away, and it created a lot of worthless real estate. In the 70s, you had a lot of property owners who owned buildings like this that were essentially worthless. They couldn't get a tenant, they couldn't sell it, they couldn't rent it. So arson became a new form of urban renewal in the 1970s. And there was an enormous arson problem in the 70s and into the early 80s. So when landlords stopped burning the buildings down and stopped burning their cities down, people who were living in the neighborhoods decided, we've got to clean this up. And in the early 1980s, we started to see a real movement to clean up city neighborhoods and bringing in elements that are going to start to form the basis of urban agriculture. Open land, debris removal, topsoil being brought into the two parks, and also people in different neighborhoods experimenting with seeds and what to plant. The beekeepers here can appreciate that because all kinds of things got planted in the 1980s that we're now looking at as producing some of our great urban agriculture and our urban environment. But it wasn't until the 1990s that the urban farming movement really began to take root, so to speak. And that really started in 1993 when Will Allen bought the land in Milwaukee that became known as Growing Power. And pretty much the rest of it's history. Will started a movement and really became kind of the face of a movement for what restorative power there is in urban farming. And now there are urban farms throughout the United States, many here in Chicago. If you do a Google search on urban agriculture in Chicago, you get quite a treasure trove of articles and places to visit. There's an article I've got here, the top 10 projects in urban agriculture. Interestingly enough, 2 of those projects are here in the back of the yards. And they missed a bunch of them. They didn't mention the plan. They didn't mention you guys. They didn't mention the Nature's Little Recyclers. So they had 2 other ones that I'd never heard of before. So if you think about that, the back of the yards is becoming much more prominent as a place for urban agriculture. And if you consider the heritage of the back of the yards, it's really, it is the place where the food industry started in Chicago. So it's becoming more visible and more important to the signs of Chicago's economic health. You can see the signs. A lot of people are trying to get into the market. The number of entrants into the market really reflects the profitability was there. And what we're also starting to see is the back of the yards is getting recognition as where this is happening. People are visiting the back of the yards from all other parts of Chicago. Andersonville, Logan Square, Wicker Park, Ravenswood, and they're saying, hey, you guys got something different going on here. There's something going on in the back of the yards that we're not seeing in other parts of the city. And it's a vital entrepreneurial spirit. It's taking the disadvantages that apparently the area has, lots of open space and open buildings, and turning those into advantages. So it's sort of like taking lemons and making the best lemonade you've ever tasted in your life. And that's what we're doing here. Recently, I brought a city-organized sustainability committee to visit here, Nature's Little Recyclers, and to visit the plant. And I have to tell you, they all left with 2 things. 1, admiration for what we're doing here, and 2, the intent to copy us. And I heard that a lot. I got to figure out how I'm going to do this in my part of town. And this is from people like in Andersonville and Logan Square and what are considered the finer neighborhoods of Chicago who are coming to here, to the back of the yards, to learn how we are turning this economic engine on. And I don't know about you, but to me, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. If they want to copy us, go right ahead. We'll be happy to give them lessons and charge them consulting fees. So while we've had a lot of success with urban agriculture, there's a lot of stuff left to do, a lot of remaining tasks. And most of that has to do with really creating an infrastructure. We've got a lot of entrepreneurs like Jana and Ed and folks who are doing their own business, but we need to create an entrepreneurial infrastructure to support those people. And so there's a number of things that I think we can do. Number 1, we've got to address land use policy. 14,000 empty lots in the city of Chicago. 14,000. That's tax revenue that's not being collected. It's a number of things that could be done with those lots. It's jobs that are not being created. Add to that the amount of a planned manufacturing space that sits vacant, that can't be zoned for anything else but manufacturing, and you have a lot of available land to create urban agriculture. What we need to do is work with our elected officials, city staffers, businesses, and communities to implement a sensible land use policy that gets the land out of vacant status into the hands of entrepreneurs and urban farmers who can create some value and create some jobs. For example, the city of San Francisco just enacted a policy that they are rezoning urban land that was previously zoned for manufacturing and zoning it now as irrigated land. The difference in taxes is enormous. It's something like an 85% tax break for property taxes. Now that property tax isn't just going away, they're banking that property tax and eventually it will come back to the city. But what's better, trying to collect property tax on vacant land or to have a business on that vacant land? The city of San Francisco figured that out and they're trying to spur urban farming and they have significantly less vacant land than we do. So if you look at that, we have a lot more opportunity to do that with that. The other piece of it that we need to take a look at is we need to figure out ways to get capital into the hands of urban farmers. This business is intensely capital, it's capital intensive and it's front end capital intensive. To build a facility like this, you had to have a month's rent, but you also had to have the upfront capital to buy all the things that you see here, to buy the lights, to buy all the equipment. If you look at somebody like Jana, she's got a whole bunch of front end expenses as well. So this market requires a lot of front end capital to get people started. How do we make capital accessible to urban farmers in a way that's sensible and allows them to make a profit, ramp up, and create jobs? At the same time, create tax revenue for the city. The third thing we need to do is find a way to leverage the efforts of all the farmers and people working in this industry together and create a unified process for nurturing startups and for promotion. Basically what I'm thinking about is this. We need to create a back-of-the-yard brand, if you will. That is, grown in the back of the yards. And beneath that, we have a lot of micro brands, of which Nature's Little Recyclers, Bike-A-Bee, all of those folks become the micro brands of the back of the yard. And we essentially create a presence that says, oh, those guys are from the south part of the city. That's a whole consortium. That's a whole coalition of farmers working together to make it happen. And make it happen in ways that involve distribution, that involves financing, that involves promotion, cross-promotion. What we did here today was terrific. We had all the foods from all these different local growers. And if we find ways to cross-promote those foods to the people who buy that, restaurateurs, suppliers, all of that, we're going to find markets for ourselves. And we can bring each other along into those markets. And that's crucial, because that way we create more jobs. The last thing we need to do is essentially engage the local community. I'm going to make a bet that nobody here in this room actually lives here in the back of the yards. Am I right? Right. So we've brought investment to this community. What we need to do now is reach out to our neighbors who live around us and figure out what they can bring to the party as well. There's an enormous amount of talent and manpower in this area. 35% of the population of the back of the yards is under 17 years old. So you have a lot of workers who are looking for skills to take them through life. You have a lot of recent immigrants from Mexico here who have an agricultural background, who worked in the fields since they were little children in Mexico. And they have enormous amounts of knowledge that we could be using, but we're not using. They come into my office every day looking for a job. They're willing to sweep the streets to work. Wouldn't it be much better if I could send them to a farm that could use the skills that they have developed and to bring that here and to make them feel good about what it is they do so we can raise the whole level of the community? Think of all the jobs we could create. You take a 17-year-old, you teach him how to do some of these things, he can feed himself for life. He now has a job. He's never going to be in the city dole again, and he's not going to be out on the street shooting people or selling drugs. I mean, I have to look at my problems on the street and how do I solve those, and you guys can help me solve those problems as well. We have an enormous capability to create significant economic value here, and I think we're going to regret it if we don't do that. So, closing, what can you guys do? First, buy local. Buy at your farmers markets. Buy local. Get locally grown produce, locally grown food, every place you can get it. When you go to the restaurant, ask them where it came from. Where did you buy this from? I mean, if they've got honey on their menu, say, where did this honey come from? And ask them. Make it known to the people that you do business with that you want to buy local. You go to the grocery store, they've got a bag of grapes from Chile and they got a bag of grapes from Michigan, get the bag of grapes from Michigan. I mean, it's that simple. Buy local every chance you get. Look at the label, see where it's grown, buy local. Voting with your pocketbook has enormous amount of impact. Number 2, engage your elected officials. Everybody knows their alderman. Does everybody know their alderman? Mm-hmm. Know your alderman. Write them a letter. They're very interested in stuff like this because this promotes economic growth in their community, and they all want to brag about the economic growth they produce in their own communities. So they're interested in fostering things like this. Talk to your alderman, your state rep, because they're the ones who are also going to figure out ways to free up the regulatory stuff that holds us back. So those are people we definitely need to engage with. And they also, finally, they will also want to be able to unleash the economic potential of urban farming in their communities as well. And so they're interested. Finally, volunteer. Every single urban agricultural business is looking for free hands while they ramp up sales and look for sources of capital. There's just no doubt about that. So take your families, take your kids, go volunteer at a place like this, or go volunteer at the plant, go volunteer with Jana, roll your sleeves up, get your hands dirty. You'll find a couple things. 1, you'll bond with your family. You'll bond with your kids. They'll say, Dad, Mom, I never knew this stuff existed before. 2, you'll learn something. And 3, you're going to feel really good about what you've done because you've made a real sweat and blood investment in your community. And there's almost nothing that compares with the satisfaction of doing that. So what I can say is this. What today is all about is celebrating the things we've accomplished so far. We got Ed funded through his Kickstarter campaign. We're really happy about that. We want to find more ways to get all of you guys funding for the projects you're doing. But this is also about the future. It's about where do we go from here. We want to celebrate our accomplishments. We have a whole lot left to do, and we can make it happen. we can turn the back of the yards back into the glory days that it had in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when it essentially fed the United States. I mean, if you think about it, if you think back to those days, we were where the food came from. We could be that again. We can return the back of the yards to that level of prominence, at least to that level of idea prominence. But that's going to require all the hands in this room to get dirty. So if we're all willing to get our hands dirty together, I think the future looks pretty good. Thanks a lot.